My name is Andy O'Connell from Guidepost Solutions. Thanks for being here today. We conducted the investigation of the shooting on November 30th of 2021. I have with me here my investigative team because there were many areas that we went into, and I wanted to make sure that we have the sufficient expertise for each of those areas to answer your questions. This will be informal. You can come up to the podium and ask whatever questions you have. We issued our report a few days ago. It's long. There's a lot of information in there, but to the extent you've read it or you haven't, we're happy to answer any questions you have if we can answer them. So why don't we get started? If you like, any questions you have, you can come up to the podium and ask. Hi.
Hi. Hi. I just have one right now. Why was the delay for issuing the report? It was supposed to come out around 4 p.m. Or late that afternoon, and it did not get out to 9 p.m. So I was wondering the reason for that, please.
Sure. So we agreed to issue the report on that day, and our goal was to get it out after school, late afternoon, which we tried to do. But in a report of that size, making sure that we're accurate in all respects, going through the report, making sure that we had it right. There's a lot of people involved with reading the report, and it just took us a little extra time. So it was really about it took more time than we thought it would at the end to get the report out, simply because we wanted to make sure it was accurate, that there was sensitive information that related to students' names and personal information. We had to make sure that the report was what we agreed to do with the district, and so that's why it took a little longer. The district did not see the report at any time, never saw the contents of the report, and so that delay was solely on our end.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I just had a question about one of the details. So you weren't able to interview Kim Potts,
Correct.
but you included some things in the deposition and the video. So in her deposition, she said that she put her hand on the door and pushed the door open to listen. So nobody was able to ask her how she pushed the door open when it was a pull door? Because it opened to the hallway, right? The
Correct.
Door? Okay. And in the video, you mentioned that she suddenly began to run. Do we know why?
We don't. We didn't get a chance to talk to her, as you said. We know what she did from the video. We know what she said at her deposition. We know what she said to law enforcement and the other time she was interviewed, but we don't know.
Did it appear when she was running that she was cautious because we don't know where the shooter is? Because you think you'd be looking, or maybe did it look like she didn't think the shooter was in front of her?
Chris, you want to talk about that?
Right. I'll say, as Andy said, we weren't able to speak to her, so we were left with the deposition testimony and her law enforcement interview. Based on the timing and the video footage from other cameras and where she was in the hallway at that point, I think one possibility is that she saw the deputies entering through door 7 in the direction that she was facing, that she saw them entering the building, and that she may have been running towards them as they're entering the building.
From door 6, because from door 6 I don't think door 7 is visible, but
Door 7 is straight at the end of
I know where door 7 is, but if she was at door 6, I'm not sure door 7 was visible, but
I don't know exactly where if she was by door 6.
I just thought that was odd because, you're looking for the shooter. I don't know if you'd be, but I just, wanted to know if that was the case and that the door did open to the hallway.
It was
It was a pull-open door.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, first off, for the report. In the report, you say that the last best possible chance of stopping it for the first 7 was when that shooter was with Hopkins and Ejac. Do you talk about, because maybe I missed it, because I did read it all, but it's a lot to digest in a short period of time, the remaining victims who were shot? Are you implying that there was another possible chance? Are you referring to the I and Alice? That there was no, I'm sorry, this is hard.
No, that's fine.
That there was no information sharing of where the shooter was to stop before
Yeah.
the other 3.
So I think the point we were trying to make there is that once the shooter came out of the bathroom, without a security guard there or somebody with the means to stop him at that point, the last best chance was when he was in front of Hopkins and Ejac and they were trying to figure out what to do. Had there been somebody standing there, the first students who were shot, maybe something could have been done there. But after that, we talk about Tate and we talk about Justin and where they were, and had certain things happen, maybe things would have turned out differently. But, obviously we can't say for sure. But we do know that we didn't see that anybody was assigned to monitor the cameras in an emergency. And what we were trying to say is that had someone been assigned to do that, once they were safe and secure in the office, right? You can't go and monitor cameras if you're fighting for your safety. But assuming you could get to a safe place in the office and it's locked in, if someone could get to the camera, then you'd be able to use the I in Alice, inform. And that is informing not only the students who are hiding, the teachers and staff who are hiding and locking down, who didn't evacuate, but also law enforcement coming into the school, specifically Deputy Lewert, who was coming back, and had he been given the information, maybe he could have got to the bathroom. Had information been put out earlier, maybe had they heard it from a PA system outside the bathroom that was not in the bathroom, had they heard it, maybe they would have decided, let's get out of here, he's somewhere else, given what they know about the school. We don't know. But for those 2, we say there were other things that may have helped. I think, for those who were shot first, there was nothing they could do. The shooter was right on them when he walked out of the bathroom. So that's the point I think we were trying to make there. Chris, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's accurate.
I just wanted to get clarification because my son was also shot during that time. So thank you.
Okay.
And again, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry we haven't met. Did you meet with members of my team?
I did.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
And I'm grateful for the report you put out.
thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Sure.
And I won't repeat anything from last time. I'm actually kind of following up on her thought. And again, in light of writing a document that can help mitigate in the future, and this is where this comment's coming from. So we had an individual in the school who bravely ran towards danger, right? They heard what they thought was gunshot, they smelled sulfur, and they went towards danger. A very, very brave individual in our school that did that. And that person came across the shooter, right? They eventually understood that this was the shooter. They were standing there with them. They saw the gun in the shooter's hand. And they knew where the shooter was. And it kind of parallels what you're saying, that the information didn't go out. And at that point, there was girls in the girls' bathroom, there was boys in the boys' bathroom, there was other individuals who were not in a safe, secure location. And the individual then turned their back on the shooter and started to perform CPR. And I understand that this falls back to training, right? So you go to your training, and she was myopic, she saw that person, and she wanted to help that person. And because of the lack of training on what to do in that situation, that beyond Alice training, she didn't know what to do. And I just want to kind of focus on that in the report, that I think that it would serve the future communities better to understand, to train people for situations like that. If you know where the shooter is and you have decided you're not going to confront the shooter, right? Then part of the Alice, she didn't run and she didn't hide. There's another tier, that beyond Alice, and that when you choose to put yourself in harm's way to try and save people, there's some protocols that you can do, right? And she knew where the shooter was, and there was a likelihood that the shooter would return and shoot her and the people she was trying to help. So in that situation, when you know where the shooter is, of course you want to get that information out so that you can warn people who are in harm's way, you know what direction he's coming, and that didn't get out. But also to add in there what alternatively could be done in that report, because you give your reaction to thing, and wouldn't alternatively be, you know the shooter's not in any area right now, to take those people that are injured out the door so they can get help rather than leave them on the floor and continue to do medical aid on someone where there's people who actually do have life-saving abilities on the other side. And then you're out and you can be telling people where he is and relaying that information. And I think that should be in the report, that so people know in the future that you get myopic when you're in that situation and you forget she lost track of the shooter. And we can't sit there and judge her by that. She was very brave to go into it. But if she would have been trained to know, if you know the shooter is, do what you can. If you're choosing to fight, but not there, right, to save, get the people out. You can't sit there. Help doesn't come. We know that, right? Incident after incident after incident. Help doesn't come, right? Get people out. Shouldn't we be putting that in the report?
I feel like we make the point in the report that districts need to inform people and train. I think what you're talking about is training and informing. Everybody reacts differently to a crisis. I mean, to be in the middle of a school shooting, whether you were the principal trying to decide what to do and how quickly you could do it, to people in the office locking down, to the deputy principals who were doing what they did. I mean, everybody reacts differently. And your point about training is well taken. Schools are trying to educate kids, and they're trying to do a lot of things. But one of the things they need to do, and we talk about this, and they're well aware of it, is they need to train people, students, teachers, and staff on what to do if something happens. And when you're in the moment of trying to save a kid, or if you're searching for the shooter, these are all kinds of things that you want to ask the people who were there that day. What were you thinking? Walk me through what you were doing. And we tried to do that. It was it's a difficult situation. We weren't in it. They were. Whether it was Lewart or Potts or Christy Gibson Marshall, these were people that were living it. And there's no playbook other than training. And your documents that you look at before a shooting ever happens. Okay, hopefully if something happens, this is when I'm revert to my training. So we tried to cover that, but your point's well taken. Yeah.
But in brevity, though, I think a focus in the spirit of what your report tends to do, I think that should be highlighted to be a learning opportunity for people, because that's real life. That's what happens to people. You know, you're hiding when the shooter's right there looking at you. You're crouching behind something when they know you're there. What do you do next? We're missing that beyond Alice part, and it needs to be focused on.
I think a lot of people, even if they're trained, may be crouching and hiding, notwithstanding.
That's what they're doing, yeah, they're trained.
Right, but even with training tells you maybe to run away and do certain things. When you're in that moment, I think there's a lot of people that would freeze, and I mean, I don't think we can say that's, we don't understand that. I think that's just life, that's human nature.
But studies have shown, if they're trained in advance, what happens when you do that? You're more likely to be killed, and there's other options. You need that secondary, because your brain falls back to that. If you don't know that option, you're going to
agree with you on the training piece. I'm just saying, when you're in the middle of it, not everybody goes back to training.
No, we're agreeing. I'm just saying, I think in your report, it would be more beneficial to everybody, as community and others, if you identified that as a weakness. And then the other component I have is, in your report, you do say for the threat assessments, and there should be a mental health professional on the team. I want to point out that you put counselor there. I think that's scary. I think that needs to be corrected. I do not want people believing that counselors are mental health experts. School counselors have a different license and different scope of practice than a licensed professional counselor. So I think it's important to really clarify what you mean by a mental health professional.
Well, I think we were looking to the language of, Gary, the threat assessment expertise that's out there, and I'm sure it talks about counselors and mental health professionals.
Yeah, the training, including Dewey Cornell's training, including the U.S. Secret Service guides, discuss in the umbrella term that they use is school mental health professionals, and they, within that umbrella, is counselors and social workers and school psychologists, all of whom have different levels, and with the recognition that there is actual medical assistance that may be needed in certain situations, but that they're at least trained to identify early warning signs and concerning behaviors to be able to elevate it as necessary.
Right. Well, I'm saying things are being misinterpreted from what actually policy and law says. Mental health professionals have a scope of practice for mental health professionals. Counselors of Michigan just need a certification as a school counselor, which is a guidance counselor, and they may not have that training. So it's very important to distinguish the difference, because Sean Hopkins was a counselor, so he was qualified? No, he wasn't. He shouldn't. He wasn't qualified to do the mental health component of that. Only the social worker was in that school. So be very careful in the terminology, because your report says, you know, a mental health professional should be on the team. For example, a counselor. I please ask you to change that.
Thank you.
How you doing? First, to echo my wife's statement, thank you.
Sure.
Because I will tell you, I am the first one to admit that I never thought it would be on the level. I thought it would be blocked or marked out or all that good stuff. So I am not as diligent as my wife. I have not read the whole thing, but I have surmised most of it. This is a difficult thing. My son was also shot that day, and we lost 4 kids, and we have a split community, and a lot of that other side, you know, I still remember some of the posts, we stand with Oxford. Do you still stand with Oxford? Because I work in the corporate world, and when I see systemic failure at a corporate level, which is what you highlight, and I agree 100% that guilt lies with the top administration. And I read the first report in May, and forgive me if this was addressed, but I guess my question is I'm looking for more like a direction on your overall findings, because of like, we have a threat assessment policy. We check a box. The state probably has a requirement. You have to submit that to be considered, you know, in compliance, right? Clearly, they have their HUG process or whatever. So did each school, is there any example? So you have, okay, for example, you have the threat assessment template, right? The piece of paper that they didn't use. Did you find anywhere that any of the schools district used it at all?
Any school districts outside?
In this school district, any of the schools, the 11, was there ever an assessment from when it was implemented? Was it ever used? Or was it just they checked the box? Did you find any proof that it was ever used at any of the 11 schools in our district?
The form?
Yes.
Okay. Gary?
Yeah, the 8400 F1 form, which is the threat assessment form on the district's website,
Yep.
we received no evidence that that was ever used prior to November 30, 2021.
Do we see any evidence anywhere in the district, any of the schools, where any level of the actual threat assessment policy as written at the district level was cascaded down through use for any of the schools at any level?
As we discussed, in the report, we identified a failure of communication of threat assessment.
Yep.
And so the superintendent at the time identified his reasons why he believed that there was a threat assessment practice occurring, including the fact that there were email updates to staff when policies were updated, which would include 8400. But as we addressed that in the report,
Yep, you
there was
did.
no substantive. We've seen no evidence that there was any substantive information provided on the threat assessment policy or the practices from the superintendent level to the building administrators.
Okay, so you would agree with the assessment that we checked the box and then moved on from it. There was mandatory follow-up, mandatory this, but there was no audit process. There was no double checking to make sure it had actually, even though it was there, that it was ever used, ever followed, and openly state in the report that your findings show they made up their own versions. And on some levels, like the suicide prevention, was a little better because it addressed instrumentality, which Hopkins failed to ask, again, which we've all known, but it's nice to hear it confirmed. I just want to make a point of the fact that the administration, which everyone swears by and says, I'm with Oxford and I have their back and they have our back, they created documents, and that's all they were. They were documents because they're useless unless they're implemented, right? And if we had a process, that's great. But if we didn't implement it, what's the purpose? So essentially they did nothing. And then further on, you talk about how Weaver points at Lamont, Lamont points at Weaver, throwing points down at those two. Nobody owned it. Was there a mapping or a process, like a role, like a scope of roles, right? Who's responsible for A, B, C, D? And that didn't really exist, right? I just want to clarify that.
Not for threat assessment. It wasn't clear that anybody's role was specifically threat assessment. There's been statements made about, well, it was this person's role and student services. It must have been under there. But I don't think it was said anywhere that this is the person in charge of threat assessment.
Okay.
And on the question about audit, you are correct that we asked about what did you do to make sure at every level that the people below you were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And it was a lot of trust. And we assume that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, we know what happens when we assume, right?
So the board, what was your oversight of the district? Well, I expected they were following our policy. Did you audit it in any way? Well, they presented it to us at board meetings. If it wasn't presented there really was no other type of audit mechanism from the board down to the superintendent. From the superintendent down to the high school. What did you do to make sure that the high school was doing what they were supposed to be doing? Well, again, we expected they were doing it. Those are the policies. They should have been doing it that way. And then at the high school, what were you doing to make sure that your counselors, teachers, and staff were doing their job? Well, the principal said he created this flow chart, and he had his own way. He sent people for training in 2018, and that this is the way they were going to do it at the high school. It was never pushed down to him the proper way to do it. But on the flip side, it was also public, as you say. So
It's the principal's responsibility to ensure that his people under his purview follow the policies as written by the district,
in
correct?
the chain has got to
Yeah.
take steps to make sure the people below them are doing their job, other than we expect them to do it. We trust that they're doing it. It's got to be more than that.
So when we're benchmarking, we'll look at we'll try to compare two things. We're doing a contract or something, right? We'll look at different elements of the business or what we're doing. Were you able to benchmark against any other policies possibly? I know you looked at suicide and threat assessment, but did you look at anything else? And I was just curious if it was consistent across the board. Attendance policy, a non-district, just in general, anything. Because I'm trying to establish here in my mind, is this just systemic? Do we just write them and then throw them in a box and cross our fingers and hope somebody follows them and maybe, 4 kids won't die?
It's a great question. I think if you go back and look at all the board meetings, since it's public, you'll see what was discussed. You'll see what it was they were focused on at these board meetings. And as we say in our report, we didn't find it the focus on threat assessment. We saw focus on a lot of other things that for some reason were brought to the board's attention by the superintendent, or maybe the board raised with the superintendent. They weren't doing things. They were talking about different policies and things they wanted to change. We just didn't see that in the same. Gary, you want to talk about like in the area of threat and suicide assessment versus other things they were focused on in the district?
Yeah, I mean, the school board is, like, to Andy's point, I mean, you can look at every month, they're addressing something in some policy, and then in terms of the actual structure of it, as we point out in the report, there's a lot of policies. There's over 400 policies, that the school board has adopted. And there's a number of assistant superintendents who get assigned to specific policies. And we see evidence in documents that certain superintendents were assigned this policy, which included the threat assessment component. And at one point, it appeared that superintendent's cabinet considered threat assessment administrative guidelines through a former assistant superintendent who we didn't get to speak to, who chose not to speak with us. But it was never enacted. And so other than some updates to the policy, for instance, we point out in the report that the policy was designed to be based upon a document that U.S. Secret Service led the drafting of, threatening situations in schools, which was initially adopted in 2004. So the original threat assessment policy actually referenced that document. And then when there was an update to that document with the most recent version, Enhancing School Safety, in 2018, there was an amendment to the policy. And so the policy was amended to say that the district's threat assessment policy is designed to be consistent now with this new 2018. But other than seeing those documents where that change was made, no other focus that we didn't see any other evidence of focus on actually the threat assessment policy, or more importantly, implementing the threat assessment policy. And the key, one of the keys, not the key, but one of the keys of that policy is it says to create, superintendent shall create trained multidisciplinary threat assessment teams. And that, the conclusion of the report is, was not done, among other things.
I mean, you would think in a district, other than just common sense, focusing on things that really matter, that had experienced a suicide, I believe at the middle school, don't quote me, within the last 10 years, and a gun that went off in the high school when someone who wasn't supposed to be on campus grabbed the resource officer's gun and it went off in the hallway, maybe would have paid better attention to policies that probably could have helped prevent that, like not letting someone not allowed to be off campus. And I'm saying this for the general public, not to you, it's not a question. Thank you, because for 23 months, we have fought a fight against a lot of voices and a lot of opinions, and you get to a point where they just don't want to hear it anymore, or you should just go away. The superintendent actually said to us, well, maybe this isn't the district for you anymore. Maybe you guys should consider leaving. Well, he left. Funny. But is there any other districts out there where you have people watching this to learn? Have your board members know what they're doing, because in a school district where the board is supposed to hold the superintendent accountable, they didn't. Where the superintendent's supposed to hold assistant superintendents and principals accountable, they didn't. Where principals are supposed to hold their purview people below them accountable, they didn't, because Hopkins and EJAC should have reported to Wolf. And then not only that, to go out, confirm in your report, to make announcements saying, please stop reporting, you're safe. So maybe those kids that saw the bullets, and if you take all of it into totality, maybe one of these boneheads would have actually done something effective to prevent what we all now know was an event that was completely preventable. Not like some of these other schools where they just come in and they're shooting. They come in from the outside. This was, your employees did their job. You had them in the office. You had them separated from the gun, and you failed to follow your own policy. And you have confirmed that for us. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? We're here. You're welcome to come up and talk to us on the side. You could talk here in front of the mic. We're going to be here for the rest of the day. We're going to be here for another session at 6:30. 6:30? 6:30. Want to bring them back at 6:30, or we can sit here for a while, whatever you all like. But unless there's other questions, we can break.
Could you speak to the numbers of people who participated in the investigation since the board decided that they wouldn't make it mandatory? They thought, oh gee, we'll just let everybody do whatever they want to do. It kind of sounds like a systemic failure in leadership at every single level. Like even with the investigation, and I know I've mentioned this before, but how can you do an investigation when Hopkins, EJAC, and 60 other people won't cooperate with the investigation? Didn't the board set you up for almost an impossible task of getting to the truth when the people involved won't even talk to you? And here they could have just simply said, yeah, you have to cooperate with the investigation. But they didn't do that. They gave everybody an out to hide their failures once again, or try to hide their failures once again.
It certainly would have been I don't want to say easier, because it was a difficult investigation in any event, but we feel things would have moved at a quicker pace in terms of the investigation had we received the kind of cooperation that I think we expected going in. I don't think we expected that people weren't going to talk. it certainly impacted the investigation, but we worked around it. But it meant us going into the files of 10,000 documents and emails. If a witness wouldn't talk to us, we'd look, okay, what documents out there will inform what actually happened? We're spending hours looking at the video of this terrible shooting to see if we could figure out what happened that day. So it impacted the investigation. I mean, in terms of the numbers, notwithstanding the encouragement of the district, because there was encouragement from times from the board, there was no direction that you had to cooperate, but we had about 70 of 160 individuals that who we requested either refused or would not respond to us. So about 70 out of 160.
It's hard to believe for me that we have leadership in our school that won't make their own employees cooperate with an investigation that they ordered. That's insane. It proves what these people are doing, and I hope our community unites against those people and replaces them, because our kids are watching. If we don't fix this, who's going to fix it? It's unacceptable. And thank you for coming out and exposing this to the public. It means a lot to me that you guys are here to answer questions without interrupting us or shutting us down. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your hard work.
Anybody else? Ma'am.
Well, this may be a rhetorical question, but I think it's food for thought for our community. If school personnel are covered from wrongdoing by governmental immunity, what good does it do to pass legislation mandating their behavior? I don't understand why we can't hold these people accountable when they've broken the law, but then there's another law that says they're immune.
There's different levels of accountability, from the criminal law to the civil law, the lawsuits, and then, of course, there's the accountability from investigations. Accountability comes from different types of investigations, and there's been accountability at the criminal level, at least of the shooter so far, and I know that the parents' case is going forward, and there's civil litigation going on, and that considers accountability, and then, of course, there's this investigation that it considers accountability. So, about the law that says certain people are immune from suit, I mean, that's beyond our scope, yeah.
Right, but I think it's something for all of us in the community to consider asking our representatives to do something about. And I also want to thank you for your report.
I got a question. Would you consider the failures from the board, Tim Throne, Wolf, the counselors, is it like combined gross negligence? I mean, they all neglected their duties. We have the death of 4 children, the whole community is victimized, and they didn't do anything wrong. How is that possible? Do you really think they did nothing wrong? From a criminal perspective, don't you feel that when people die from gross negligence, there should be accountability from prosecutors and from our governor ordering a real investigation into what these people's failures and how it hurt our community? Or they just get a free pass?
So there are prosecutors who look at the evidence in this case, and they do what they think they need to do with it. Certainly, they had what they had before the report, they have what's in the report. There are judges and juries that will deal with what comes out in court. For us, we didn't get to a legal standard that courtroom, civil or criminal. For us, it was a standard of, they had certain responsibilities by policies and guidelines. Those policies and guidelines mean something. I mean, they're put into place by the board because the board represents the people of the community, and the board makes a conscious decision, or they inherit when they become board members, policies, and they're not there. They're not optional. The policies and these guidelines, they're there, and it says right in them, this is what you must do, you shall do. So that's what we were looking at. Did they live up to the things they agreed to the community? Did they live up to that standard? And I think those are the things we wanted to look to see who was responsible for, and that's what we covered in the report. it said something, oh, the governor. One of the things we touched on in there is, we didn't have subpoena power, we couldn't force anybody to. And the question is, who does have that power in this kind of situation where we're not doing a criminal investigation, that's for the prosecutor's office, we're not in court doing a civil litigation investigation. This is different. And the question is, who else would have that subpoena power? And I'm sure anybody else does. Ma'am.
I listened to some of what was said at the earlier meeting, and this lady brought up the issue with the counselors and a health professional, things that should be adjusted in that report. So, especially with that EOP that I heard, and I'm going to go back and listen again, and definitely bring it up with the board, but are you guys going to revise this report based on some of the things that were brought out here today, just so far in the first two meetings, which I think are extremely important, especially with that EOP? And maybe some of these folks that are sitting here now maybe want to hear some of what she said. I don't know it as well as she does, but I think they're crucial for the community to know. So I do think the report, there should be an addendum or something about some of these things that people that do know exactly what they're talking about in the extreme failures, they need to be, magnified, highlighted over and over again, so we know where they messed up big time. So are you going to do a redo?
So we will consider what's been said here at the meeting. We'll talk as a team. We'll look at the report. We were hired by the board. Even though we did an independent investigation, we were hired by the board. And so... Could you speak up? Yeah. So we were hired by the board. We did an independent investigation without their involvement in the investigation. So we will definitely talk about what we heard here today. We will look again at the report and talk to the board about it, because they're our client and they hired us, so we need to make sure we're all on the same page. And if that needs to be done, we'll do it. But I can't promise that here, but we'll look at it. Hi.
Okay. To one of their points, there was something incorrect in the report regarding the hospitals for Phoebe and Eli, and I don't know if anyone has brought that to your attention, but they were incorrect, the hospitals that they were taken to. I spoke to both of their parents, so I don't know if they'll make it to this, but just something for you guys to note.
Okay. Do you have that information, or?
I do. Phoebe went to McLaren and Lapeer, and Eli went to McLaren and Pontiac. If you were asked to testify in the civil case, do you have any restrictions or agreements with the school district that would prohibit you from testifying for the victims?
Not testifying for anybody in particular. Obviously, if we had a court order or subpoena to testify and produce evidence, we would follow the law. That's the best I can say on that.
So there's no agreement in writing that you can't?
The agreement would say that we have a duty of confidentiality as it relates to the investigation and our work, which we abide by. But the law trumps any agreements. So I think hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
I don't know how, I don't know how deep your investigation went. I've got kind of a math background, and I've noticed some statistics that are kind of troubling with regards to school shootings in general. I'm going to run this out there. It seems like it's out of left field, but it's kind of concerning when you start looking at it from these aspects. Have you seen any of the videos of the actual event? Anyone here?
I think most of us have watched the video.
Okay. I've heard that in viewing the school shooting video, it was noted that the shooter had mannerisms that appeared as if he was possessed, i.e., he shouldn't have had the skills attributed to using the firearm displayed for a person that young. I've been doing research in this area and found some interesting but disturbing coincidences that need to be looked at, followed up. School shootings are relatively new, maybe back to 2012, Aurora, Colorado, and Newton, Connecticut. In the 1960s, I believe students at some schools were allowed to bring their shotguns into school so they could go hunting after class. So it's kind of along the lines of what's changed. There's all sorts of mental health issues that kids are experiencing. Some of them put on a host of prescriptions to help them out, like Focalin, Wellbutrin. What if those prescriptions are not helping but causing more issues that create other issues? I've run across a patent online, 3951134. Apparatus and method for remotely monitoring and altering brain waves, from 1976. This is something you would find possibly our intelligence services, I'm afraid to say, using, and not just the U.S. From an online post I came across on the internet, take someone who is already having emotional, psychological problems, bombard them with all kinds of crazy news, have a therapist push insane stuff on them, and fill them up with drugs like Prozac, drive them crazy. Then, using sound, put voices in their head telling them to kill. Voices in your head can be very powerful, especially if the person's got any bit of schizophrenia. Then it was noticed there was a trend in school shootings lining up against bad news coming out on the media. For example, the elementary school shooting in Connecticut lined up with some testifying going on for Benghazi. Charleston school shooting, 6/17/2015. There was a server scandal for a certain political figure going on. If you're not trying to report on that when clearly people want to hear about it, then all of a sudden there's a school shooting. There was a campaign lawyer going to trial for lying about Trump-Russia collusion. This suddenly had the Uvalde school shooting going on 5/24/2022. I'll give you a copy of this. It's kind of scary. When I look back at what was in the news around that ugly November 2021, I'll run through just a few, but there's a good 20 headlines out of current events that are going on. Melbourne continues 60 hours straight of protesting in front of Parliament to stop mandates and lockdowns. Challenges to Joe Biden's OSHA vax mandate assigned to conservative-leaning 6th U.S. Court of Appeals. Wisconsin Senate committee subpoenas absentee ballots and voting machine records. Kyle Rittenhouse gun charge dropped. More election fraud in Georgia uncovered. Like I said, those are just some of them. There's about 17 I've got. Now, I quoted a patent from 1976. The scarier thing was there's a researcher from Harvard University, prestigious Harvard. Dr. Charles Lieber and a couple of his Chinese colleagues were arrested for receiving money from China for some of their work on nanotechnology. Dr. Lieber has over 50 patents. They were trying to connect people's minds to the internet since 2006.
Do you have a question?
My question is there anything that you guys have seen that would indicate that that kid may have been under some of these conditions or been under some of this influence, regardless of whether he's there pulling the trigger? I understand.
Yeah, our scope was the district and
Okay.
elements of the district and how they interacted with the shooter before, during, and after, or before and during the shooting.
Okay.
Not the shooter himself. That would be something that would be looked at by people that were focused on his actions.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's fine, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, we can take a break and we'll be back in 2 hours and you're welcome to stay. If there are no other questions now, then we'll adjourn. Thank you.